brilliant and amazing and engaged, fun cat owners here today. So we'll let everybody get seated, so to say, in this virtual world. Dr. Wismer, you're in Illinois today. What's it like up there?
It's hot. Well, okay, it's like in the high 70s, 80s, which, yeah, it's too hot.
That's fair. That's fair. That's hot for you guys, right? It's amazing. It's crazy to believe we're already in fall. It feels like we've really hit the pause button on time, but we have been so excited for this content and for this webinar, and it looks like we've got a good group of people in and seated, and so we'll let you guys get settled in. But in the meantime, I'm going to introduce you guys. I'm very excited for this lecture to Dr. Tina Wismer. She is with the Animal Poison Control Center, but additionally, she teaches at the University of Illinois and is a consultant for Veterinary Information Network, which for you guys that don't know, Veterinary Information Network is like the hub, the go-to, the resource networking for tons of information, for working with your colleagues. It has been in the vet industry forever, as long as I've been around at least, and forever. And very proud of the work that she does there, making sure that all of your veterinarians stay up to date with the best and most important and current information. So I'm going to get my face out of here, and I'm going to turn you guys over to our expert here today to talk to you guys about poisonous houseplants and toxicities, Dr. Tina Wismer.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen. Okay, so today we are going to talk about avoiding toxic traps for cats in your house. As you can tell, I'm a big fan of the alliteration here. So certainly we're going to talk about quite a few things. And there's no way we can talk about everything, but let's go ahead and get started here. Oh, come on. No, it doesn't want to let me advance my slides. Hold on a second.
So just double make sure you are clicking on the right screen. We've had a little bit of a hold up with that if you've got a screen popped up in front of it. And while you play with that, we'll pop up this poll for everybody to look at so we can get that turned over and just ask you guys, how do you keep your pets safe from toxins? And how do you know, or do you know what common plants are toxic to cats?
Great.
And then Dr. Wismer, you can see if those will advance for you now.
I should be good now. Yes.
Perfect.
I found it.
Perfect. All right, I'm getting on out of here, and you can go ahead when you want. We'll leave this poll open so we can see what folks have to say.
Yeah. Wow. You guys are on the ball here. Looks like things are going well. Okay. So let's go ahead and talk about toxins. So it would be nice, right, if everything in our house was labeled, right, poison, and then we would know. But the problem is it's not. And it's also that something could be poisonous for your cat that may not be poisonous for you or I or for your dog. So definitely species differences. So when we think about cats, cats aren't the poster child of getting into trouble by eating things they shouldn't. It's actually dogs. So here at Poison Control, cat cases are only about 10.7% of the cases that we take here, whereas dogs make up 88.2%. I like to say it's because cats are smarter, but it's because they definitely have different behaviors, as we've learned about. So the most common things we see kitties getting into are insecticides. And these are typically insecticides that owners have applied to the cat. We're not going to talk about those today, but many times what happens is you put on a flea spray or you put on the drops, and the cat can reach around and lick it, and they start to drool horribly, right? They foam at the mouth. It's just a taste reaction, right? Cats can't spit, so When they can't get rid of that bad taste, they start to drool. So that's what most of our insecticide calls are. Nothing too serious. Human medications, these are definitely more problematic, and cats can get themselves into trouble. And we're going to talk about some over-the-counter medications today, some that are pretty common and some that you may not have heard about. So we'll touch base on a few of those. And then plants. I am a master gardener, so I love plants. Unfortunately, most cats do too, and they get themselves into trouble by nibbling on these leaves when they shouldn't. So as we said, cats are different, right? Cats approach the world differently than people or dogs, and cats will chew on things, like they'll chew on plants, they'll chew on pills, but they're not gulpers, right? Rarely do we run into a cat that swallows something and then thinks, oh, hey, maybe I shouldn't have done that. Maybe that wasn't food. So cats are definitely more discriminating here. One of the reasons is that cats have different taste buds than you and I. They don't have that sweet taste bud receptor. Sometimes I wish I didn't either, but with cats, right, you know, they'll sample a little bit of sweets, but most of them don't have a sweet tooth here. And they do tend to avoid things that are bitter or very sour. Now, occasionally we get calls about cats eating, you know, other strange things we wouldn't expect them to, you know, like cantaloupe or olives or things like that, that we wouldn't think that they would be attracted to, but fortunately, those are not an issue here. We also have to think about with cats, anything that gets on their fur is going to be in their stomach very quickly, right? We're going to have an oral exposure after we have a dermal exposure because of their grooming behavior here. And another thing with kitties is that they have concentrated urine. And that means that any toxin that's excreted through the urine is going to be concentrated, and cats are more at risk for kidney damage. So today, when we're talking about toxins, I am going to mention kind of the science behind it. You know, you may have heard Tylenol is poisonous for cats, or ibuprofen is poisonous for cats, but we're actually going to touch base on why, right? Why are cats different? So the first thing to think about with kitties is their evolutionary history, right? Cats are obligate carnivores, right? They have mostly a meat-based diet. So that means they actually have very few metabolizing enzymes for plant material and for things like medications or other drugs that animals can get into. So cats, ferrets, they're also true carnivores, whereas people, dogs, bears, we're omnivores. We actually have a very large range of metabolic enzymes that we have to process these type of things. So this makes kitties more sensitive because they're missing the enzymes to break down products like phenols that we can find in cleaning products, and along with our pain medications. Cats are also special if they have very different red blood cells. And by very different, they actually have what we call sulfhydryl groups. And these groups are found on the hemoglobin. You have them, I have them, dogs have them, but cats have more than you or I. And that means that their red blood cells are actually more sensitive to damage from some medications here. And we also think about cats, you know, they do have an overall smaller body size. So a regular dose for you or I can be a huge overdose for cats. So just a couple of general things to think about when we're thinking about things that are toxic or poisonous. First of all, please realize that just because something is toxic doesn't mean it's deadly. Certainly there are some items that are deadly, but others that may just cause some mild stomach upset and are still considered to be toxic. So we always want to make sure that when we talk about toxic, realize there's a range of toxicity. And what we always say here at Poison Control is dose determines the poison, right? Because literally everything is toxic, right? Too much oxygen, too much water, right? Too much chocolate, anything can be poisonous here. So many cats will ingest toxic items, but they may not get enough of it to be a problem. So we always talk about dogs and chocolate. Chocolate's actually poisonous to cats too, but rarely do they get enough to be a problem. And looking at our 2019 data, right, we had 509 cats that ate chocolate, right, almost 2 a day, and only 8 of them had eaten enough to get themselves into trouble. So those were usually cats that got into like triple chocolate brownie type things. And yes, I know I said they don't normally have sweet tooth, but you know, it's a bell-shaped curve. We always have some that are outliers here. With cats, we have to think about restricting what they can get into, right? Cats have been described as, you know, toddlers on speed, right? They can get anywhere. They can climb, right? They can climb your curtains. They can climb the Christmas tree. They can get up on the bookshelf. They can eat those plants. So we do have to make sure that our households are safe for cats, right? So medication should be stored in areas where cats can't get into. Same way with cleaners, right? I know cats that can open cabinets. So certainly we may need to have things like baby locks on our kitchen cabinets. You know, maybe we don't want to keep foodstuffs or chemicals down below where the cats can get into it. And then of course, always keep products in their original containers and keep labels. If you are going to use something like a rodenticide in your house, make sure to keep the label because they all act differently and we need to know which one we need to treat for if it's a problem. We also want to make sure to keep our cats out of the trash, right? So keep foods and trash out of their reach. We can see this cat here working on getting himself into trouble. So truly, it's not about training the cats. It's about training ourselves, right? We need to be the responsible one in the relationship and make sure cats can't get into things. Now, a few common things that I recommend. Number one, don't keep the cat medications in the same drawer as your medications. We get a lot of calls from people that they've given the cat their medication by mistake. And usually they've taken the cat's meds also. They're usually not worried about themselves, but typically they are very concerned about the kitties. So keep them in separate areas. That helps stop mistakes, especially when you're busy in the morning. And then take your medications in an area that the cat doesn't have access to, right? So you don't drop it on the floor. Cats aren't huge pill eaters in most cases, but there are a few medications that they will go ahead and ingest. And we also have to think about, you know, other physical injuries that can happen to cats, right? Our kitty here has his neck through that plastic bag. I know many a cat that has done this. They run, you know, crazily throughout the house, and they certainly can get themselves injured. We also want to make sure that we don't allow cats into the washer or dryer. Unfortunately, we have kitties that are killed that way every year. And then watch out for dangling wires. And, you know, sewing and craft stuff is sometimes just too much for cats to handle, right? They want to eat those long, stringy things. And as one of my friends always says, you got to watch out for cats. They're always plotting. We never know if it's murder or suicide, but you need to be careful. So make sure you keep things that could be problematic out of the cat's reach. So let's talk about a few items first. So let's talk about pretty but poisonous plants. So it would be nice if most of our cats had this same attitude, right? These plants, I hate them. That would be wonderful. Unfortunately, kitties like to sample plants in the household here. So what are a few things we can do to keep cats out of your plants? Well, hopefully we can keep them out of reach by hanging them or potentially putting them on a high shelf, keeping them in a room that they don't have access to. If you have a cat that's not a big plant eater, but they like to dig in the pots, you can use things like hardware cloth or wire across the top to keep them from digging here. Some people use aluminum foil. I tried that with my cats. They thought it was a fabulous toy because it made noise and it didn't last very long in my pots. You also need to remember that the cats that you have today are not the same cats as that you're going to have, in the future. So you may have very well-behaved cats around plants, but that new kitten could be another story. So this is unfortunately what we get a lot of calls about, right? The owner calls and says, hey, my cat ate a plant. And we say, what kind? And they say, well, it has green leaves. Unfortunately, that makes it a lot more difficult to identify. So if you're going to know what plants you have in your household beforehand, that's always very helpful. And we do prefer, Latin names because unfortunately the common name for plants can be used for several different types. I like to mention angel's trumpet. Angel's trumpet is a common name for 3 different plants, 2 of which are highly toxic and 1 is non-toxic. So we want to make sure we know what we have here. And then always remember, even non-toxic plant material can cause stomach upset in animals. So the first plant we're going to talk about are lilies. Now these are true lilies. These are either Lilium or Hemerocallis, okay? So true lilies can cause kidney failure in cats, right? And any exposure of a cat to one of these flowers, whether it's a petal, whether it's the leaves, the stems, even the pollen, means we need a trip to the veterinarian, okay? Now, daylilies, which are Hemerocallis, are actually edible for people, but unfortunately toxic for cats. They also cause blindness in cows that eat the roots. So it truly just is a species difference here. So with lilies, the first thing we see is vomiting. And this usually happens pretty quickly within a few hours after a cat has munched on these. And then they develop kidney failure within 24 to 72 hours. Now we don't know exactly what the toxin is that causes kidney failure, but what we do know is that the toxin acts on these proximal renal tubular cells. So if we look at my little tubule here, these are found in the kidney, and basically toxins and body fluids get pushed through the glomerulus into the tubules, where they go down and they become more concentrated urine, and then they leave the body, okay? So what lilies do is they actually affect the cells inside this blue circle here, okay? And what happens is when they damage these cells die. And the debris from the dead dying cells actually blocks up these tubules. And if you have enough of these tubules that get blocked, then we don't get any urine production. And if your kitty isn't producing urine, that's a really, really poor prognosis. Now, the good news is that if we put the cat on fluids within the first 18 hours after they get into them, we put them on a high rate of fluids, that keeps all that debris from plugging up the tubules, and these cats will do fine. So if a kitty in your house has been exposed to a lily, this is not something that we wait on. Right? Whether it's 2 a.m., whether it's 2 p.m., you need to see the veterinarian immediately and get started on fluids. Because after about 18 hours, there tends to be enough damage done that many of these cats don't make it. So we want to get them to the vet quickly. Now, when we talk about lilies, right? Lily is a common name that reflects a lot of different lilies. But what we're concerned about are the Lilium and the Hemerocallis. Okay, so Lilium, the true lilies, these are things like Easter lilies, tiger lilies, Japanese show lilies, and then the day lilies, which are Hemerocallis. So as we said, lily, common name for a lot of different plants. But what we need to do is look at the Latin name to determine which one is the true lily. So if we look here, lily of the valley, that's Convallaria. This is a toxic plant, but it causes heart problems, right? It doesn't cause kidney problems. The one in the middle is peace lily, spathiphyllum, that contains insoluble calcium oxalate. So it's a toxic plant, but it doesn't hurt the kidneys. And we'll talk about those in a little bit here. And then we've got Easter lily, so Lilium longiflorum. So it is the lily all the way on the right. That's the true one here and can cause problems. Our lily calls did go up this year with a lot of people gardening, and because we couldn't see each other, sending them bouquets. We had more lily calls in the first 6 months this year than we did all of last year. So certainly lilies are very dangerous for cats. Now there's another plant out there called the Cycad or Sago palm. And these are native to like Florida and other warm places. So some of you may be thinking, why are we talking about them? Right, these are outdoor plants. Well, the answer is because you can buy these as cute little potted palms, right? You can go to like IKEA, Home Depot, Lowe's, Target, and buy these cute little potted palms here. So these plants are actually toxic to all species of animals. And in cats, what we worry about is their liver. The toxin actually gets metabolized in the liver and destroys liver cells. Now, all parts of this plant are toxic, right? We see this, our pretty little potted plant here. Now, as potted plants, they usually don't produce seeds, right? And only the female plant produces seeds. But all parts of the plant are toxic, right? The root ball, the leaves, and initially what we see is vomiting, right? Your cat starts to vomit. You may see some plant material in it, and then you may end up with some blood. They become more depressed. They stop eating. Their liver values go up within 1 to 2 days. And because the liver is basically being destroyed, they start to bleed internally. And then we can see seizures and death. So this is certainly a plant we do not want in the house with cats. Okay? So no Sago palms. Now, some of you may be saying, wait, I've had sago pudding before. Is that related to this plant? And the answer is yes. However, sago pudding is processed. Basically it's boiled and rinsed enough that the toxic compounds are gone. So you can eat sago palm, but certainly just not in this form, and not for our kitties here. A little more rare plant, but it is becoming more common, is the pregnant onion, right? And we can see why it's called the pregnant onion, right? It's got an onion-looking bulb here, and it has these cute little babies that come off the side, these little pups here. And this plant is related to that lily of the valley that we just mentioned, and it contains compounds that affect the heart. And they're going to slow down your heart rate, and they're going to potentially cause their kitty's heart to stop. So this is definitely not a plant you want in the house if you have cats. Okay, so we've talked about the worst of them. So we're now going to talk about some of our toxic plants that are not so toxic, right? These can cause problems, but we don't expect them to be deadly, like the lilies, the sago palms, and the pregnant onion. So this is a huge group of plants that contain insoluble calcium oxalates, okay? So really, if you probably have any house plant that's got thick, shiny green leaves, it probably has calcium oxalates in them. So we're gonna look at a few of these plants, and you may think, I've got one of those here, right? So we have things like philodendrons here on the left-hand side, and then Dieffenbachia on the right-hand side. Really nice plants, right? They do well in low light. It's hard to kill them. Our peace lily, like we previously mentioned, and then our Chinese evergreen here on the right. Looks a lot like the Dieffenbachia. Doesn't really matter which one it is, right? Because they have the same toxic compound. Pothos, right? Sometimes called devil's ivy, has insoluble calcium oxalates along with calla lilies, right? These are some of my favorite flowers. They're just beautiful. And I could fill an entire hour just going through all of the insoluble calcium oxalate containing plants. So it's a lot of them out there. Just, recognize what you have. So why are these a problem? Well, these calcium oxalate crystals are shaped like needles, right? I mean, they're long, they're skinny, and they're kept in these little capsules called raphides inside the plant. And what happens when an animal bites into the leaf, these needles shoot out into the tongue and into the gums, and it hurts, right? So the animals stop chewing on that plant. So if we think about why are all the pretty plants poisonous, the answer is because they can't run away, right? So they have to protect themselves from insects and other animals by using basically chemical warfare. Or in the case of something like a cactus, right, mechanical warfare. So these little needles shoot into the tongue, the gums, and your cat says, oh, hey, I'm going to stop chewing on that. So you may see them doing some drooling, they may rub at their mouth, they may gag, they may actually vomit too here. But it's usually self-limiting, right? They do it for a little bit and then they stop. With very large ingestions, we could potentially see some swelling of the throat, and that could affect breathing. But in my 22 years here at Poison Control, I've never had that happen with a cat, just a couple of dogs. Now, what you as an owner can do to help ease this pain is we're actually going to give them more calcium. So milk is the easiest thing to give. If you don't have a cat that's a milk drinker, you can use things like yogurt or butter or ice cream, really anything with calcium in it. So that means things like soy milk or almond milk will work also here. Okay, so calcium oxalate plants, very common, usually just causes mild GI signs. Okay, bulb plants. So with bulb plants, right, we've got some in the spring, things like tulips and daffodils. And then around Christmas time, it's pretty common to go ahead and force an amaryllis. That's what we have here on the right-hand side. And with these, what we think about is that the part that's above the ground is much less toxic than the bulb itself, the part that's below the ground. So cats that chew on tulips or daffodils that are in a bouquet may have some mild stomach upset, but the bulbs themselves can cause much more severe problems, bloody vomiting, tremors, and seizures. So cats, because typically we're dealing with bouquets, usually don't have severe signs with these. Well, what about some other common bouquet plants, right? What about things like roses? So roses are considered to be non-toxic. Now, of course, as we said before, non-toxic plant material can still cause vomiting in some cases. So don't be surprised if your cat, chews on your roses and vomits. Now, even better than roses, cats are definitely attracted to babies' breaths. And we do find that in a lot of our rose bouquets here, right? It's kind of this little dry flower. Cats like to chew on it. And then they go ahead and may have some stomach upset, but it's considered to be non-toxic. So no rush, don't worry about it. Take away food and water, let the stomach calm down for an hour or so, and then kitties can go back to normal. So not a big problem there. And I do have to mention the poor maligned poinsettia. It's definitely overrated as a toxic plant. We may see some stomach upset if it's ingested, but it certainly will not kill your cats, okay? So stomach upset. Okay, so we're gonna switch gears from plants to over-the-counter medication dangers. So the first one we're gonna mention are the non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. So things like ibuprofen or naproxen, okay? Things that you or I may take to, reduce pain, inflammation, reduce a fever, those type of things. Unfortunately, these are very, very toxic to cats, and they can cause things like stomach ulcers and kidney failure. And this is due to the fact that cats are missing those enzymes that metabolize these products. So they're going to hang out in the cat's body for a much longer period of time and can be potentially deadly. So how does this work? Well, NSAIDs, right, ibuprofen, naproxen, what these do is they decrease pain and inflammation by stopping the production of prostaglandins, right? No prostaglandins, no pain. However, unfortunately, prostaglandins are just not involved in pain. They also play a very big role in a couple other body systems. So in the stomach, prostaglandins control the blood flow to the stomach, that protective mucus layer that's in your stomach, and the amount of stomach acid that you secrete. So if you take too many NSAIDs, we can end up with stomach ulcers, right? Because the stomach acid gets directly into contact with the stomach wall and it causes ulcers. So that certainly can happen in our cats. And on the kidney side, what happens is these prostaglandins normally regulate the blood flow to the kidneys. And what happens, right? This is our nephron again. Remember it from our previous slide when we talked about lilies. NSAIDs act here on the vasculature. So they actually cause constriction of these arteries. So we don't get good blood flow to the kidneys. And if you don't get good blood flow to the kidneys, they don't get oxygen. And if they don't get oxygen, the kidney cells start to die. So that means if you have a kitty that accidentally gets into ibuprofen or naproxen, as veterinarians, what we do is we put them on IV fluids to maintain blood flow, right? To counteract this constriction of the arteries. And we put them on stomach protectants to reduce the stomach acid so we don't get stomach ulcers. So it's certainly treatable, but if you have a kitty that gets into this, please call your veterinarian immediately. Now, the other common over-the-counter drug that is quite toxic to cats is acetaminophen, right? Tylenol is a common brand name here. This is definitely something we do not want to give to kitties. There's no safe dose. As we talked earlier, dose determines the poison, and for cats, yeah, really, really low doses can be problematic. So what does acetaminophen do in the body? Well, it can change the blood so it can't carry oxygen. So your kitty could look like it's got chocolate-colored gums, right? And because it's not oxygenating well, it's going to have difficulty breathing, right? They're going to be panting. They're definitely going to be lethargic. They're not going to really want to move around at all. And it can cause liver failure. So if we look at the blood sample here on the left, that blood change is called methemoglobinemia, and methemoglobin can't carry oxygen. And then the right blood sample is the normal color. So how does this happen, right? So this is why, we're going to talk a little bit science here. So we have acetaminophen, right? Acetaminophen is the parent drug, the parent compound that we ingest, and dogs and people glucuronidate and sulfate acetaminophen, making it into a non-toxic metabolite, right? Everything's good, everything's fine. Now, cats, unfortunately, don't glucuronidate and don't sulfate very well because they're missing these enzymes. Remember that whole evolutionary problems with kitties here. So what cats do, or if you're a person and you're an alcoholic, what happens is acetaminophen goes to the liver to this group of enzymes called cytochrome P450s, right? And cytochrome P450s are enzymes found in the liver that will break down acetaminophen. Unfortunately, it makes this toxic metabolite called NAPQI. okay? NAPQI is the metabolite that will actually bind to those liver cells and cause destruction. Now, this is much more common in dogs or in people who have, alcoholism than it is in cats, but it can happen. And in people, we actually see kidney toxicity with acetaminophen. We don't see that in cats. Now, the other dangerous thing we see in cats is acetaminophen is broken down into this PAP metabolite, and this actually attacks the red blood cells. Remember how we said the cat red blood cell is more sensitive because it has these sulfhydryl groups? So if you look, cat has 8 of these per red blood cell compared to dogs that have 4 and people that only have 2. So this causes that blood change where cats can't carry oxygen. So cats are very, very sensitive to those changes. So if you do have a kitty that gets into acetaminophen, you do need to get them to the veterinarian right away. And there is an antidote that they can give, which helps change the methemoglobin back to normal, and it protects the liver. Now, there may be another medication hiding in your household that you may not think about containing acetaminophen, and that is a drug called Phenazopyridine, right? It may be found over the counter as Azo or Urostat. People, especially women, will take this for urinary tract infections. This is the drug that changes your urine into that bright orange color. So what happens when Azo is ingested, it breaks down into a dye, which is that bright orange color, and into acetaminophen, right? So if a kitty gets a hold of this, we can see the same signs as acetaminophen. So if you think your kitty has a urinary tract infection, this is not a medication to give them, right? Give your veterinarian a call. Now we also have cold medications, right? Decongestants like pseudoephedrine, and that's almost like giving a cat amphetamines. They become very agitated, high heart rate, high blood pressure, potentially tremors and seizures. So certainly we want to keep our cold medications away from our kitties, and also things that contain cough suppressants like dextromethorphan. Dextromethorphan, it has actually become a drug that teenagers abuse. And in cats, when they ingest it, they actually can, well, it appears that they hallucinate. We really don't know, but they kind of watch that invisible tennis game. They have a high heart rate, and we can also see tremors and seizures. And remember that most of these cold medications are also going to contain acetaminophen or an enzyme. Now, a different medication out there that you may not know about is called Thioctic Acid or alpha-lipoic acid. And this has become popular recently with people to take. It's an over-the-counter medication. It acts like, it's vitamin-like, and it's used as an antioxidant. Well, in kitties, there is a normal dose, but at higher doses, and for a cat, basically one of these pills could potentially put them into the dose where we can actually start to see signs of our cats becoming wobbly, like they're drunk, having some seizures and some liver damage. So this is definitely an antioxidant that if you're taking, make sure it's not near your kitties. And most of these are, the alpha-lipoic acid is normally found like in meat. So these capsules are a little attractive to cats. So make sure you keep them away. Okay. Cleaning with cats. That's kind of an oxymoron, right? Oh gosh. Yes, mine make way more problems than they do with cleaning here. So let's talk about cleaning. Oh, but first I want to mention silica gel. Okay, many people panic, right? The cats find these little containers of packets of silica gel that are inside things like electronics or pill vials, and they're fun, right? They're light, they crinkle, they make noise. They're filled with silica gel, which is inert. We do not expect this to be a problem here. If you've ever used crystal-based cat litter, that's also larger beads of silica gel. So you know if you can use it as cat litter for kitties, it's got to be pretty safe stuff. So we don't expect this to be a serious problem. So let's talk about other cleaners here. So our toxicity is going to vary with the product being involved here, right? When we're cleaning, we may use things like detergents or soaps or alcohols or disinfectants, right? So we need to look at what we're using. But the biggest factor affecting toxicity is going to be concentration, right? Is it a ready-to-use product where it's already been diluted, or do you need to dilute it yourself? Do you have to wear gloves when you're using it, right? If there's something that can affect your skin, then think it can certainly affect the cat's skin or their digestive tract, right? And what's the pH? Is it highly acidic or is it pretty neutral? So with general cleaning, what we're going to find most commonly are things like anionic or non-ionic surfactants, okay? Fancy word for basically kind of soap here. These are things that are not going to be a problem, right, for kitties. You're going to find this in hand washing, liquid dish detergent, the soaps that you use like bar soap, multi-surface cleaners. Typically, these are products you can use without having to wear gloves. Now, because they are soaps, if you remember back to when you were young, if your mother washed your mouth out with soap, we can see some drooling and potentially gagging and vomiting. But no serious problems are expected here. So if you're using one of these type of products, keep your kitties out of the area until it's dry. So what about things like wood care, right? We have things like oil soaps or waxes, or if you're going the more natural route, things like vinegar and water. All of these are relatively safe around cats. They can cause stomach upset, so keep the cats away until it's dry. Once it's dry, it's safe to let the cat back in the area here. Carpets and rug cleaners, right? We've got powders, and then we've got like our enzymatic cleaners or detergents. These contain those ionic surfactants, okay, anionic surfactants. So these are pretty darn safe when it comes to cats. Ingredients are kind of similar to what we find in shampoo, right? They could cause some stomach upset if ingested. So just keep the kitties off of them until they're dry or until you vacuum them up. And then it's safe for your cats to be in the area here. Now, let's talk about the ones that are problematic. Disinfectants, okay? So disinfectants are things that are going to kill things, whether it's bacteria or viruses, right? And we've heard a lot about disinfectants recently with COVID going on, right? So when we talk about disinfectants, we have different types of them. We have things like quaternary ammoniums, which are also called cationic detergents. We have bleaches, and we have hydrogen peroxide along with alcohols. So let's talk about our bleaches first here. So if you are using bleach in your household, regular household bleach is typically 3 to 6% sodium hypochlorite. So it's already relatively dilute. So if your cat walks across a wet area or ingests some of this, we could see some mild stomach upset and some oral irritation, but not expected to be a serious problem. Now, if you're using like an ultra bleach or concentrated bleach, then we can see burns in the mouth. Now, color safe bleaches are interesting because even though they've got bleach in the name, they're actually hydrogen peroxide. Okay, so you'll see them on the label as sodium carbonate or sodium carbonate peroxide. And what happens when you mix these compounds with water, it makes hydrogen peroxide. So that can actually cause vomiting or stomach ulcers if your kitty ingests it. So we want to keep them away from that. So if it does happen, give them a little milk or water, and certainly see your veterinarian if you see any irritation or burns. Now, the quaternary ammonium compounds are probably the most dangerous ones you have in your house. Now, as we said, concentration is key, right? Now, it's not going to necessarily say quaternary ammonium on the label. It may be these long chemical compounds like alkyl dimethylbenzonium ammonium chloride. Okay, wow, it's a mouthful. So it is all about concentration. So if you think about these Lysol wipes that we have up here, right? Now it would be great if we could actually find any of these, depending upon where you're at in the country. But you know that you don't need to wear gloves when you use these, right? You can bare hand these, wipe the surface. So these actually have a low concentration of cationic detergents in them. Unlike something like this Odoban, which is a concentrate. You would need to dilute it before you use it. If you use this 2% directly on your rag and you didn't wear gloves, you would end up with chemical burns also. So we definitely want to keep kitties away from any kind of concentrated products. So these concentrated products can actually cause oral burns and skin burns. I apologize for the gross pictures, but this is what you should look for, right? If your kitty has gotten into one of these, and we can see that we actually have burns, right, on the edges of our tongue here. So we like to rinse these out with a little bit of milk or water and then get them into the veterinarian. They may need pain medication. Depending upon the severity of the burns, they may need things like antibiotics. But you can imagine this kitty is going to be pretty painful here. Now we also have our other corrosive agents like acids and alkalis. Okay, so things like toilet bowl cleaners, anti-rust compounds. You know, I live in a place where I have a well and I have a high concentration of iron in my water, right? It's almost orange. So I routinely use an anti-rust compound to clean my shower. So I make sure that the cats are outside the door. I spray this, I wait, I rinse it off, and then once it's dry, I allow the cats back into the bathroom. So keep them away from these type of products. They can cause severe burns, just like we saw in this previous slide here. So when kitties have oral burns, right, they're going to drool, they may gag or vomit, they may rub with their face, and we can certainly see ulcers or wounds on the skin if, you know, it gets on their skin. So once again, rinse, dilute, see your veterinarian. Okay. Now, many of us want our house to smell nice, right? Cleaning isn't complete unless the house smells nice. So some people will use liquid potpourri or those reed diffusers, and these actually contain cationic detergents, okay? So we can see chemical burns with cats that get into these, just like we can see with cats that get into other concentrated detergents. So if you're using these in your house, please make sure there's no way that your kitty can get to it. And that brings us to the end, right? Make sure to pet proof. You know, you don't want to come home and find your cat, right, watching TV.
Oh my goodness, that was amazing, Dr. Wismer. I just know everyone is like checking lists. We have 2 minutes left, and I'm going to ask you in that 2 minutes to address essential oils, because that was the question that was blowing up in the Q&A.
Yes. So essential oils. This is that whole dose determines the poison, right? What we can see is products that are, let's use tea tree oil, for example, right? There are products that are labeled for use on animals that contain tea tree oil, and they're usually like at a 5% concentration. What we don't want to do is apply the 100% oil to the cat itself, right? Especially if we've got open wounds or, you know, we're worried about an ear infection. Essential oils do have pharmaceutical effects, right? I mean, they're active compounds. Some of them are antibacterial, some are antifungal, but we don't want to put them at 100% directly onto the cat. So that brings up, what about my essential oil diffuser? So is it going to cause a problem with your kitty? If you have a cat with asthma, no essential oils in the house, please, right? We don't want to trigger their asthma. If you have a normal healthy kitty, you can certainly use these diffusers, but remember, the cat's sense of smell is much more sensitive than yours or mine, right? So we do worry that it's almost like, you know, sitting on the airplane next to that woman with too much perfume or that man with too much cologne on. So if you're going to use them, make sure there's an area of your house where the kitties can get, where they don't have to smell that all the time.
That is perfect. I know everyone was very glad you got to that because there was a ton of questions of, and I think there is a lot of confusion around essential oils for that very reason. Caitlin's asking about marijuana toxicity. We're about out of time. I know there's lots of information on the ASPCA Pet Poisons website. I know there are great apps to download. So where's your favorite place to send them for those types of information so they can look up a little more?
Sure. ASPCA.apcc.org. I go ahead and we've got a list of toxic and non-toxic plants there, so you can pick and choose, along with a lot of articles about things like marijuana.
Yeah. And if you don't have the app, you guys get the app. They've got 4 different species on there. It's thebomb.com. They do the adjustable levels on certain things. I keep it on my phone. So Dr. Wismer, thank you so much for all this amazing. I know everyone's feeling a little bit like more peace of mind. We're going to check our plants. And this conversation was so needed. So thank you for helping to keep pets and people safe across America with what you do. And for your time today. We thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
We'll have you back soon. That's for sure. Thanks, guys.
Bye.